Hey guys, it's Dave here with another video on Rocket Lab. If you're a subscriber, thanks for coming back and continuing to watch the content and engaging with me in the comments down below. If you're not, I hope by the end of the video you'll consider hitting like and subscribe and joining our group as we talk about investing and most recently focusing on Rocket Lab, but I do cover other companies and other topics as well. It's just that I happen to be extremely excited about Rocket Lab as an investment opportunity at this point in time. So today what we're talking about is a couple weeks ago, actually, Rocket Lab's CEO Peter Beck and their CFO Adam Spice recently held a talk at a investor conference, giving a basic overview of Rocket Lab and fielding a lot of questions. And I thought the entire talk was extremely interesting, extremely informative. So I've cut out a lot of the parts that I thought were the most important, whether it's something new, something I hadn't heard before, and just kind of put it all together, and we're going to go over it, and I'll give you my thoughts on what was said as well. I will say, though, it's about a half-hour discussion they had, and I found the entire thing extremely interesting. There wasn't a lot to cut out, but I had to cut things out, obviously, for time. So if you're really interested in Rocket Lab, I do recommend you check out the entire discussion. It's up on their investor relations page on their website right now. So with that, let's head over to the discussion. Okay, guys, so for our first clip here, we have Peter Beck talking about the different addressable markets that Rocket Lab is looking to chase after in the future.
And ultimately, we're looking to move into applications. And if you think about space, you can really define it into three buckets. You've got launch, which is absolutely critical to get anything on orbit. It's about a $10 billion TAM. Then you have what we call space systems, which is like satellites and spacecraft and all the components that go along with them. And that's about a $20 billion TAM. And then you have the applications that you actually provide from space, and that's around a $320 billion TAM. As I mentioned before, we started in launch. We're the second most frequently launched US rocket behind SpaceX. And then we moved into space systems, where we provide a number of really critical components into a tremendous number of other people's systems, but including our own. And we build our own satellites and spacecraft. And then, really with respect to space applications, we're building the infrastructure necessary for us to ultimately provide an application from orbit. But also, we're kind of allowing the billions of dollars of other people's capital to wash over the sieve and see which business model in an emerging market actually works. So right now, we're very happy to sell all the picks and shovels to all of those opportunities. But ultimately, I think that's where we have exposure to a really, really large TAM.
So I actually thought that was extremely interesting. When I first started looking into Rocket Lab, one of my biggest concerns was that launch business is really not that big. As he said it himself, the total addressable market for launch is about $10 billion. So obviously, if you're a fish, you're constrained by the size of the fishbowl in terms of how large you can grow. And I didn't really know about all their other space systems business or the potential for services business. So I was just looking at it and I was thinking 10 billion, like, okay, how big can the company really grow here? But hearing him talk about the services business is extremely exciting to me. It's a lot like Starlink, if you think about it that way. SpaceX will be providing internet as a service, which is so much more massive of a market than launch itself. Now, Rocket Lab doesn't have to compete head-to-head with SpaceX on an internet constellation. Satellites can provide all sorts of services to customers. It doesn't even have to be to the general public. They can provide services to companies, which is, I think, more of what he's getting at. So they can provide things like imaging, weather, radio, communications, all sorts of applications. I probably don't even know what half of them are, to be honest, but That addressable market is what really excites me, and I think could take Rocket Lab as a company to the next level in the future, as opposed to just staying with launch, where you've kind of got a ceiling above you, right? Like if it's a $10 billion industry, the company can't grow that massive. So that was exciting for me to hear. Let's keep going on to the next one.
In the small launch sector, where you have a small satellite that you need to get to a particular orbit, our previous competition was from the likes of Northrop Grumman with Minotaurs and Pegasus, and those rockets used to cost about $50 million. Now someone who would have normally spent $50 million to get a satellite into orbit spends, on average $7.5 million on an Electron. So we did for the small satellite launch market what SpaceX did for the large launch market. Being a first.
Okay, so not much too new there, but just kind of a reaffirmation that their Electron vehicle has really driven down the cost for launching small satellites. Used to be about $50 million a launch, and now they've got it around to $7.5 million. And I expect that could fall further when they master reusability, or if not, they could keep prices the same and let the improved margins just have all the money fall to the bottom line.
First mover in launch is really, really critical. We started off launching fairly low value payloads while we proved our ability to reliably launch over and over again. And now we have a lot of US government customers, but also customers come to us with their entire constellation to launch. And the reason why that's so significant is that when someone comes to you to launch their entire constellation, it's kind of like they may as well just hand you the keys to their company, because if you screw that up, you destroy their company. And so, as kind of emerging competitors try to do what we've done, the bar to get over from a reliability and heritage perspective is really, really high. I mean, if your ride is cheaper by half even, it just doesn't trade with the potential loss of a constellation and a satellite. So, reliability and heritage is always absolutely everything in this industry.
Yeah, so this term heritage is not one I was very familiar with before I started researching Rocket Lab. And it's basically your track record, your history of success. And Rocket Lab has now built that history of successful launches. We just had, fingers crossed on the last boost, but a successful launch at least for NASA's Lunar Capstone mission. A lot of the companies they've been acquiring have great heritage as well. So it's extremely hard for the new players, I think, to get these most lucrative contracts, the ones you really want, until you've proven out that reliability and track record, which is not easy, as we've seen. Astra recently had a failure, and I really do hope they bounce back from it. But it's not easy, and I do feel comfortable with Rocket Lab being at this point and having the heritage and the technical expertise. Let's keep going here.
We've re-entered 5 rockets and into the Earth's atmosphere now, and this is an effort to make Electron a reusable launch vehicle. So we're very, very close to succeeding on this, and we don't need this to be successful for our business to be successful. It's just really, really awesome for margin acceleration on the rocket itself.
This one is pretty exciting. I felt like they were very close. They haven't reused an Electron yet, but just having Peter Beck affirm that they feel extremely close to accomplishing that massive goal, it's great to hear. And also the fact that the company can be profitable and successful without even accomplishing this, that's very comforting. And also it's got to mean that if they do accomplish it, that's just a bonus and a massive improvement to their margins.
And we're on more than 1,700 spacecraft on orbit successfully have our components, whether it be deep space missions, low Earth orbit missions, or other planets. And then finally, space.
Yeah, so obviously space systems, just highlighting there, a lot of you may be aware, but they're in all sorts of spacecraft out there, even in the James Webb, which is the next generation successor to the Hubble. It's the most advanced space telescope ever made. They're trusted with projects like that. So that goes back to the heritage once again, and that addressable market is actually bigger than the launch market. So room to keep growing there, although launch is, of course, still critical in allowing these things.
Applications, as I mentioned before, we have no investments here to date, but what we are seeing is an acceleration as we talk to customers. The conversations are moving more and more to can you build us satellites, can you launch us satellites, to can you just provide the service. And that's ultimately where I think this is going to all go in the space industry. I think if you look in 5 to 10 years time, who are the really big space companies? I think those companies are going to be the companies that provide just services rather than bits and pieces and launch and kind of segregated elements of the whole vision.
So excited to hear once again talking about these space applications businesses, the potential for those. Obviously, that we said the TAM is smaller for launch and space services, and really just Rocket Lab looking to get into this space. Obviously, Neutron will help them with the ability to launch satellite constellations, and you're moving up the value chain, right? So complete vertical integration and capturing more of the revenue, more of the profit. Why not just operate it yourself and provide it as a service instead of launching someone else's satellite or building someone else's satellite? You just make more money. Makes perfect sense to me, and exciting to hear that it really does address one of my biggest fears I had when I started looking into Rocket Lab, which was, of course, the size of the market.
No, I wanted to get into...
By the way, guys, that presentation section was stuff that a lot of us may have heard before. I still found it very interesting, but I enjoyed the Q&A a lot more as... Peter Beck and Adam Spice can really just talk about how they feel about different things, and there's the potential that they may reveal new information. So I found this section particularly interesting as well.
A little bit of the diversity of the company that you've created. Obviously, you've mentioned, and I think people, when they look at you, they think a launch company, but they don't realize all the other applications you've done on the space systems business. Maybe you could just sort of talk about how this differentiates you guys from others, and clearly the MDA was an indication of that win was an indication of all the hard work you've done in sort of piecing together a lot of the key components.
Sorry, by the way, MDA is a very big contract for satellite building that they just received.
Yeah, I think the MDA win really shook the industry up. Nobody was expecting Rocket Lab to win that, and really solidified our place in the kind of the big three or big four now of companies that are capable of producing these kinds of class of spacecraft. And we won that. Obviously, we put the best technical solution in forward. We understand that we weren't the cheapest, but we had in an environment where supply chain is incredibly constrained. Owning so much of those critical elements like solar, reaction wheels, star trackers, all those kinds of things really enables you to guarantee your schedule, and schedule and surety is really, really important. And then as we look at the diversity in the company, this was always the plan, and in hindsight, I wish I didn't call it Rocket Lab. I think I was being a little bit too specific on that day. It probably should have called it Space Lab. But we see even in the last quarter, the vast majority of our revenue actually came from our space systems business, not our launch business. And it's important that everyone understands, launch is incredibly lumpy. In the last quarter, we had a launch a customer who needed to move their satellite out by a couple of days, which pushed us into the next quarter, and we launched 2 days into the next quarter. And so launch is always super lumpy. I will say that I struggle to think of a time when a customer has been waiting on a rocket.
So yeah, just talking a little bit more about the space systems business there, obviously how important that vertical integration is. I never really thought about it this way, but yeah, the fact that they can do all these different things through these acquisitions where they can provide the reaction wheels, the solar panels, and all the parts that you need to build your satellite, having that guarantee right now, at least, that's with supply chain issues everywhere, that they can deliver on time is extremely important.
And it's important that everyone understands, like, launch is incredibly lumpy. You know, in the last quarter, we had a launch, a customer who needed to move their satellite out by a couple of days, which pushed us into the next quarter. And we launched 2 days into the next quarter. And so launch is always super lumpy. I will say that I struggle to think of a time when a customer has been waiting on a rocket. And quite often what will happen is we'll be ready, but a customer will have an issue with their spacecraft, or there's a million reasons why they delay, and that kind of creates a very lumpy business in launch. Maybe.
Okay, so just talking about launch a little bit here, we all know, at least not this previous quarter, but the one before only had a single launch, and it has been extremely lumpy. The interesting thing I found about this clip is talking about how customer readiness has caused delays as opposed to any manufacturing problems. So that's good in the sense that, you know, Rocket Lab is able to provide these rockets, and the rocket is always ready when needed. But it makes me worry a little bit about demand, and I can see the order backlog is there. Like, every quarter we see the backlog has grown larger and larger from these contracts that they're getting and they're signing. But does worry me a little bit if the customer isn't ready in time. You know, you may have a quarters with less launches just because the backlog's there, the customers are not ready, so you don't have a launch. And it's kind of problematic from a company standpoint if you don't have any launches in a given quarter. I wish it kind of speaks to demand in a way. If you think of the customer isn't ready for your service, it's kind of like a demand issue almost. So I hope, I guess that's just kind of the way launch is, but I hope we can see some evening out of that going forward, and we can at least get a more steady launch cadence in the future to alleviate any concerns around these issues.
Well, no, I think that each mission is, each thing that we do is opening up new and bigger opportunities. So clearly, as Pete said, it was pretty disruptive. We had an investor meeting earlier today, in fact, where that individual had been an investor in space for some time, and he offered, he goes, yeah, nobody in the industry saw that coming. Like, Rocket Lab should not have won that, right? But we did. Now, how much of that's because, we won the Capstone mission, which, again, the one that's going to the moon, which fed into Mars, which is now feeding into, the MDA thing. And again, we're seeing more and more kind of higher value missions. Like, for example, we're also putting in infrastructure in our facilities to support a lot more classified work, right? So, and with the investment in classified facilities, you get opportunities to move up the food chain. Everything in this business is, that's why Pete mentioned heritage. It's so important because it's not something that you can create with slideware, right? You just have to put stuff on orbit, right? And I think that with that, you continually kind of move up, and when you have like NASA Category 1 certification, that allows you to carry higher value NASA payloads, which then you start getting you get into different pricing structures, and it creates a lot of goodness from that perspective. So, and the stuff that we're seeing now, again, is just increasing levels of engagement with the customers where they just seem to want to give us more.
Interesting stuff there from Adam Spice, the CFO, just talking about the value of their contracts and how their improving track record is allowing them to move up the value chain. Talking specifically about this recent satellite contract they received, where a lot of people in the industry were shocked that they were able to win that contract. In the past, there's only been a few companies who can handle that kind of manufacturing, and they're joining those ranks now and getting these higher value contracts, which is exciting to see for sure. Of
the scope of the project, which is, I would say, when Pete and I kind of look back, we thought it would take us 5 years to get to a 50-50 mix of space systems and launch, and we got there in like less than 5 quarters, right, from coming public. And then if you look at the the scale of what we're doing and trying to get to where we're getting to the space data application side of things, again, we are now having customer level conversations where that's what they want. And we thought that might be 10 years down the road, right? So it's amazing how quickly this industry is evolving, and you see stuff the stuff that we see, we're now starting to take a little bit for granted, right? And when you look at like the Amazon Kuiper launch kind of announcements for $3 billion worth of launch stuff, that was, came out a few weeks ago. You have Lots of these. You saw the NRO announce their awards to people like Black Sky and Maxar, and it's those kinds of opportunities. Planet, I guess, was not mixed as well. Where else do you see these multi-billion-dollar new opportunities being announced on a fairly regular basis now? Which kind of just points to our thesis, where we think space is a huge opportunity. It's very important to be positioned so that when you're kind of spring-loaded for that ultimate volume ramp, it appears to be kind of happening now.
When should we start?
Pretty exciting from Adam Spice, just talking about kind of almost ahead of schedule of where they thought they would be in terms of where the company's going. Really exciting to see they already have companies talking about the potential of Rocket Lab just providing the service or application of these satellites and operating the entire constellation, the entire satellite themselves, pulling way ahead of where they thought they would be, as well as in space services. They thought it would take them 5 years to spool up enough to equal their launch revenue, and they're already there. So moving very quickly, and he's definitely right. There are some big contracts being handed out these days for launches, a lot of huge constellations people want to build. Definitely a booming industry right now.
Just see a little bit more of a steady cadence, out of launch. I think we have you modeled, and I think the street probably is somewhere around there as well. 12 launches, so you hit sort of the one launch per month sort of cadence. But when can we start to see that maybe pick up a little bit?
Well, I think it's completely dependent on customer growth and customer readiness. We have over $500 million of backlog, and it's like real backlog, deposits down, real contracts. On the launch side, we see especially that we just play manifest monopoly every week, trying to move stuff around. It's nothing's disappearing. But it shuffles around and kind of moves out. But yeah, I mean, we get to one a month is kind of first a sweet spot. But one every two a month is where our model is completely closed, and that excludes reusability. Once you start putting in a first stage reusability, then you accelerate those margins, pretty quickly.
So we didn't really get a timeline there, but it was still pretty interesting to hear him talk about going up to 2 launches per month, and that's without even reusability. Once you have reusability, maybe you could go beyond that. That would be a lot more revenue. But on the other side, I still don't like how reliant we are on customer readiness. The order backlog is extremely comforting, don't get me wrong. I guess that's the perk of being fully integrated. If you actually build the satellite for your customer, then you don't have to worry about their readiness. And hopefully we get there a bit more in the future. But yeah, some interesting comments there. I didn't realize they were targeting that level of cadence and the implications, what kind of revenue they'd be making if they can achieve that, are pretty interesting. We'll probably go over that in another video in the data.
I mean, the good news is that because we own the satellite components business, we get to see what's coming up in the future. And like a spacecraft program can take 3 years to develop or more. So when customers come to us ordering reaction wheels and star trackers at volume, we know that thing's real, and we can kind of have these early discussions and predict when those launches are going to be. So it's almost like a canary in the coal mine, or a temperature of the industry. And right now, like across all of our components businesses, we are just tapped out. Like they're just growing, and we're just supplying as much componentry as we can.
Which means launch has to follow.
Yeah,
Right.
Launch just has to follow.
Exciting stuff there. The space systems business is basically, the demand is sky high. Industry is booming. They're providing the parts for satellites. So clearly these satellites are going to need to be launched at some point down the line, which means next few years the demand is looking high.
And then there's been some misunderstanding in the market where the Falcon 9, the rideshare, they just had their 5th mission. I think when we get asked the question, it's like, well, why don't people just do the rideshare versus going with a Rocket Lab? Maybe if you could just talk about the value proposition there.
Sure.
And why.
Just to cut in here, I thought this one was extremely interesting. When I first started looking into Rocket Lab, that was one of the big concerns I had, is like, why don't you just ride share on a Falcon 9? You can probably get a better deal. So I'm really glad that Peter has addressed this here directly, and we can all kind of hear the reasoning behind it.
Why, and the difference is because not all rockets are created equal, and I think what you're doing is differentiated.
Yeah, so I mean, think of a Falcon 9 as a bus, and what we do is probably an Uber, maybe a limousine. And if I said to you, you can have an airplane ticket free to the United Kingdom, but you actually want to get to Australia, it's irrelevant. Like, if you need to get to Australia, you need to get to Australia, even if the ticket is free to the UK. And the people that fly with us, it's not a trade of, should I fly with a Falcon 9 or should I fly on Electron? It's like, if I don't care where I'm going, and there's it's not just like one element, it's like inclination, or the angle you're at, it's altitude, how high you're flying, it's LTAN, which is the time of the day. So for example, if you want to take images over Ukraine, going into like a sun-synchronous orbit doesn't give you the optimized ability to take images in Ukraine. You want to go to a mid-inclination where you have a high revisit time over that landmass. So what we see is a lot of customers, is when they're starting to build their constellations, is they'll throw something up on a Falcon 9 that's super cheap. They'll get into orbit, and they might get a pass over Ukraine, whatever, once a day or something like that, and that's fine to prove out their business model. But when it comes to like, I need these images every day at the refresh rate, and there's visit frequencies of this, then I need to go to this particular inclination. And then most of our launches these days are instantaneous launch windows, meaning that we have to launch plus or minus 0.2 of a second. The reason why that's important is because if you just launch in the dark with an Earth observation satellite, they don't see, like, there's nothing to see in the dark except city lights. So it's pretty useless doing that. So a lot of our customers will have a very specific time of day they need to launch to synchronize with the sun, so that they actually, when they're over Ukraine, it's daylight. And it's really a fundamental business model thing. Like, if you require that particular destination in orbit, you require that particular destination in orbit. It doesn't matter if it's on a ride share or not. That's what you need.
And it doesn't matter if it's a big satellite or a small satellite.
Yeah.
So then you have the choice. You can go on a dedicated Falcon 9 for $60 million, or you can go on a dedicated Rocket Lab for $7.5, right? So it's a choice.
Right.
Yeah, I'm really glad he addressed that. I know that was a worry I had when I first started looking into the company as well. It just seems like Rocket Lab can get you exactly where you need to go. If you're on a ride share with 100 plus other satellites, it's kind of just hit or miss. And yes, you can get a cheaper deal with that ride share, but it's almost like a completely different market. If you need to go where you need to go, then you have to go with Rocket Lab, at least right now, or one of these other new startups like Astra, another small launcher. So doesn't appear to me that the Falcon 9 is in real danger of cannibalizing the Electron's demand.
But the difference being the payload that you can accommodate versus maybe what?
Correct, and that gets neutralized with Neutron.
Yeah.
Right? So Neutron is our 13-ton vehicle.
I do want to ask one more quick, and I think it would be helpful, is what would be some of the key takeaways you want people to come out of this with, and just sort of going forward, how they should be thinking about Rocket Lab?
Well, I'll say something, Adam, you can follow up. But I mean, look, we're an end-to-end space company. I think we're known primarily as a launch company. Yep, we lead the sector in small launch. No arguments there. We dominate that. But we're much more than just a launch company, and very diverse. We hit our numbers. And we have, capital is liquidity is not a threat to us. We have plenty of capital in the bank, we're just focused on 100% execution as we always have been. But
No, I think I have nothing to add to that. That's great.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. Peter, Adam, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, that's it for the video. Nice to give some information to potential investors at a conference like this. I think he was right. They do kind of hit their numbers. We didn't have as much launch revenue as we expected in that previous quarter, but they went ahead and made up for it with their space systems business. let's head back and wrap up what we learned and what we heard from this presentation. So I think there's a lot of fascinating things we learned from this video. Again, you can feel free to go check out the full one on their investor relations page. But I mean, I kind of already knew this, but liquidity isn't a concern for them. They have plenty of capital in the bank. They raised a lot of that during the SPAC process. Electron is not in any danger really of having their demand cannibalized by the Falcon 9. Just the fact that Falcon 9 can launch for more small sats cheaper doesn't really matter, because they all have to kind of end up, like, you can do it if you don't care where your satellite's going to go, but a lot of these satellites need to go to a specific location, launch at a specific time of day, and for that you'd need something like the Electron. Great to hear Peter and Adam talk about the potential massive space applications business in the future. I think that was the most exciting thing I heard, because I'd seen that on a few slide decks, but I never really heard anyone talk about the future space applications businesses. And to hear that companies are already asking them about it, like, can you just launch and operate for us and just provide it as a service? That moves you all the way up the value chain, completely integrated. You're building the satellite, launching the satellite, operating the satellite, providing the service. So you're capturing all that revenue, cutting out any potential middlemen. And one of the concerns I had with a potential satellite constellation is like, well, how do you beat Starlink when they got such a head start? But you don't even really have to. Like, they don't have to go into internet service. There's many other lines of business that can be offered through space and through satellites. So exciting to hear that. And I think the potential for Rocket Lab long term is a lot bigger than I originally imagined. The ceiling is not at the 10 billion launch or even the 30 billion launch plus space systems. The ceiling can be quite high for this company, and at a valuation of like 1.6 billion right now, we're nowhere near hitting that ceiling. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you found it interesting and informative as I did. If you did enjoy it, please click like and subscribe down below. Comment to me on what you thought was the most important part of the video or what you learned. I'll talk to you guys down in the comments, and see you next time. Bye.